All right, welcome back. The final stretch. So after you have closed the customer, this is by no means the end of the interaction. Whether or not you have an organization that hands off customers into account managers or has a customer support team to support customers coming out the other end, oftentimes there is still a continuation from closing a customer through to making sure that whoever is responsible for closing them sets some basic expectations and kind of educates the customer in terms of what the handover process would look like. So let's talk a bit about how to set and manage good educations, and we'll also talk about what is appropriate in terms of educating a customer. Usually, these are the two main things that follow coming out of a sale. Sometimes some of these elements can be sprinkled throughout as well, but I would say the clearest thing to helping a customer get a good experience coming out of an interaction really depends on how you set those expectations. So I'll give you an example to help you visualize and understand the importance of expectations in and around customer satisfaction, but not only that, but also just general personal happiness as well. So happiness and disappointment, I would say, is directly related to expectations. The higher your expectation is for something going into it, the higher the likelihood that those expectations are not met. And if those expectations are not met, you are disappointed. On the other side of things, if you have low expectations and it is exceeded, you are pleasantly surprised. So that's basically how things turn out. So I remember like the first time the Transformer movie came out. And for me, I had very, very poor and low expectations for it. I thought, hey, a cartoon about transforming robots and cars, how good could it be? Especially since, you've seen the old cartoon and what transforming looks like. And lo and behold, when it came out, I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. The animation is different. And it was actually more impressive than I thought. The effects were really interesting, and I did end up enjoying the movie. Obviously, I was totally disappointed by the following sequels. Nothing novel at all explosion in cars, everything was already expected. So generally, expectations kind of set the tone for the experience coming out of it. Not only general day-to-day experiences that we have in our lives. If we expect something from our spouse and they don't fulfill it, we end up getting disappointed. On the other hand, if we don't expect something, if they throw a surprise party for us, then we are pleasantly surprised, right? So the same goes for products and services that you sell as well. If a customer has a baseline expectation on, let's say, delivery, because God forbid, Amazon has spoiled the marketplace, and nowadays people expect quick delivery. If not quick, then at least a clear, transparent line of sight in terms of their delivery process. Has the item been shipped? Where is the item in transit? And has the item delivered as well. So there's a baseline expectation around certain products and certain services. And there's second to that, depending on how you sold your product or service, you may or may not have built up certain expectations around what they expect your solution to provide and how the experience is going to look like. So as you start to think about kind of setting and managing expectations, the first key point is not to oversell. And what I mean by overselling here is you don't want to, number one, make up false promises. Number two, obviously, you don't want to focus on elements that I would say are kind of like what everyone else is doing. So for example, like you commonly see a lot of companies say like, oh, we have the best customer service out there or the best support team. And everyone always claims to be the best. And trying to communicate this actually comes across as being a bit manipulative, because why is there a need for you to exaggerate other aspects? Is your product or service not excellent enough to stand on its own? If you end up taking this route where you overpromise and talk about being the best in X, Y, and Z, there is nowhere else to go but down, right? Any flaw will lead to unmet expectations, and your customer will be disappointed. So, if your company honestly and sincerely believes that you are the best in a specific area, then how do you quote unquote humble brag? I would say instead of telling, focus on showing, demonstrating. For example, instead of saying we operate with integrity, tell a customer an example of a story, of a situation, of when you actually went out of your way to do the right thing for a customer that you had, right? If you can actually show a customer how you live and breathe those values, if you can show a customer examples of how you have excellent customer service, that will go above and beyond just saying, hey, we have the best customer service out there. And one example I can think of is I recently bought an inflatable boat from this company called Kokopelli down in the States. So they create these boats that are not the regular inflatable pool toys, but more for like whitewater rafting, those kind of things. So these are really durable, lightweight, packable pack rafts. That's the term for it. And I had some damage with my product when I got it. And I actually reached out to their customer support team, and they were super responsive. I shipped the boat back to them, free shipping. They took a look at it, and unfortunately, they couldn't fix the issue, but it wasn't a structural issue related to the boat. So they ended up actually giving me a few other things in response. So number one is the boat itself wasn't leaking any air, but there was a chamber in between the boat. So it's supposed to be a 2-chamber boat. There's the front part and the back part. And there was a leak in between. And that was a difficult part to access, to fix. So they couldn't do that. But they said, hey, you know what? If your concern is the integrity of the boat, the flotation of the boat, we'll give you some internal dry bags for free. And these are inflatable dry bags that you can put inside the boat because there's a zipper component that will allow you to access the internal of the boat. And from there, you put in those dry bags and it will add additional flotation just in case anything happens. They also gave me a whole bunch of additional accessories. So they gave me dry bags. They gave me a carry bag. They gave me the inflation gauge to check the pressure of the boat. So a whole bunch of things. And in the end, I was actually pleasantly surprised. I did not expect them to do as much. I was expecting either they fix it or maybe they ship it back a new or replaced model. And they actually went above and beyond. So instead of saying like, hey, we have good customer service, buy our products, they execute and they let their customers brag on their behalf. Make sense? So if you do have something that you excel in, don't let that be your selling point. Let your customers sell that for you. You should instead focus on your products itself. Make sense? So don't oversell, don't overpromise. On the other hand, if you overpromise and you underdeliver, that obviously ends up in bad situations. I'm not asking you to underpromise. I'm not asking you to sell yourself short, right? It's more about, instead of thinking about underselling, it's more about thinking, okay, based on how what my products or service are, how can I create memorable experience by identifying key areas in your buyer or user's journey where you can exceed their expectation by over-delivering? So instead of focusing on kind of the overselling piece, it's more thinking about, okay, based on my customer experience, this is the typical purchase journey. This is how it usually happens when they use my product and interact with it. How can I exceed the expectations, maybe in the selling process itself, or maybe in and around when they use my product or service? So if you can focus more on that, then you can craft those exceptional experiences. And when you exceed them, the expectation, then obviously your customer is going to be very delighted, right? So be clear. If you have kind of flaws in your products or service, it is not a bad thing. Like every product or service will have some flaw. There's no such thing as a perfect product. Certain things you can do, certain things you can't do. Be clear on that. Make sure that you take the time now after you've closed the sale to educate the customer, educate them in a lot of detail. Because if they find that it's not a fit for them, it's okay. It's not too late for them to back out of the sale at this point. You can still do a refund if you've already processed it. If not, you can still always let them go. That's absolutely okay. At the end of the day, like, it's really about managing the expectations in terms of getting a good customer experience. And I'll give you a real example from one of the companies I used to work for in a second. But your goal is really, you don't want customers to walk away with any nasty surprises. It's much better for them to back out now rather than end up buying and then coming back, leaving a bad review or returning a product or service and having a bad experience. So the one that really stands out for me in terms of a live example of the importance of this is when I used to work for the telecom providers, both Dell and Wind Mobile, now called Freedom Mobile. One thing that really stood out to me was Bell being one of the incumbent carriers in Canada. they had one of the largest coverage in terms of areas and reception. So one of their selling points is we were often taught as reps to kind of highlight how good our reception is, that we have the highest coverage in all of Canada. And what we often had as a result of that is by talking about amazing coverage, we would occasionally get customers coming back saying like, oh, you know what? I went camping in this backcountry area. I did not have reception. What the hell, kind of thing. On the flip side of things, when I was working with the smaller carrier, Freedom Mobile, they were a new carrier. There were a lot of areas that they didn't have reception with, and some where they, even if they didn't have reception, they would piggyback off another carrier and there would be roaming charges. So we would train very well to, in the sales process, educate the customer on, what is roaming? How does roaming work? How do you disable it if you're worried about overage charges? How do you make those emergency roaming calls if you do need to, and let's say you're stranded in the mountain, right? So we did a lot of expectation and education setting with our customers. And what I actually found is oftentimes I would have more displeased customers with the big carrier, Bell, than I would have with Wind Mobile, Freedom Mobile. Instead, with Freedom Mobile being a smaller carrier, I would often instead get customers coming back saying like, oh, you know what? I didn't expect to get coverage up in Whistler when I was skiing. And surprisingly, I did. It looks like you either installed some towers over there or I just wasn't aware of coverage over there, right? So at the end of the day, I found that customers would actually be more delighted rather than disappointed because we would exceed the expectation rather than under deliver. So at the end of the day, this is kind of the gold mine in terms of really getting that good customer experience. So in and around kind of setting expectations, there will be some amount that you can control and some that you can't. You do your best to try to manage expectations and set them at the start. But obviously, once a customer starts using your product or service, or maybe you have a limited amount of time to engage with them, there will naturally be some bad experiences that come down the pipeline. My word for that is, number one, you need to understand what customer success looks like in your organization, in your product or service. Because if you know what a good experience looks like, then you can follow up with them. And keyword here, be proactive instead of being reactive. You can follow up with them to see if they are getting the experience that you hope they're getting, right? Obviously, if they're not getting a good experience, you need to know sooner rather than later. So be the one that leads the follow-up, not only the follow-up in terms of closing the customer, but the follow-up post-sale. You want to be proactive with understanding if there are any problems, any difficulties, those kind of things. The reason why mostly is because if there are issues, and if you are merely reactive, waiting for people to complain, know that generally if, let's say, one person is complaining, there are probably at least 5 to 10 more people who are dissatisfied that haven't taken the time to complain. Either they just switch, cancel, or maybe they sit with it for a period of time that they can tolerate, and then after that, they will churn out. But your goal is you want to be proactive. You want to know the problems before they come up. Don't wait for them, because once you wait for them, it's already too late, right? Second thing is when you follow up as well, do a personalized follow-up, whether it be in person or if not in person, at least a call or email. It really shows that you care. And the example that really stands out to me is I remember one time buying a handbag for my wife, and the manager from the store actually called me and said, hey, you purchased a handbag here last week. We remember you were buying it for your wife. Does she like it? And that really exceeded my expectation, right? So how can you kind of create those amazing moments for your customer that really show them that you care, that really stand out from what your competitors might be doing, right? So check in. Don't make any assumptions. Follow up with them, and make sure that you're exceeding those expectations. It's also a good time now to kind of define what follow-up looks like for them, so that they understand and expect you to call them. So you may say, hey, you know what? Expect that after this service, for example, we'll send you a survey or we'll give you a call, right? It just really demonstrates that you pay attention to the customer. If you know that there are certain milestones that they should be hitting, you also want to kind of benchmark against that and see like, hey, for example, we notice, let's say, if you haven't created an account or you haven't created a transaction, is anything going wrong? Are you struggling with the account setup process? Those kind of things. So if you know what performance should look like, if you know both the customers in terms of what kind of results they should be seeing as well, then this is a good time to check in with them and make sure that they're actually seeing good value out of your product or service. And if they are getting good value out of your product or service, then we'll talk about account management in a separate video. But then this is your opportunity to think about what or when, what kind of items or how may you kind of upsell or cross-sell. Okay, so focus on enriching the experience. Don't just merely wait for people to reach out to you and say like, hey, it was great, or I'm not happy with certain things. Another live example I can think of is so I'm on the Strata Council for my building, and we ended up switching our caretaking janitor company. And the reason why was mostly because the previous one, a lot of tenants were not satisfied with the standard of cleanliness. And obviously, like they could have kept their contract with us if they had been proactive, if they reached out to us and followed up to try to understand, you know, what are you dissatisfied about? And if they took action, took steps to fix those issues, we would have been forgiving and we would have been willing to continue working with them because you know, it's tedious. It's tedious to look for a new vendor. You have to shop around. You have to retrain the new vendor that you bring on, those kind of things. So unfortunately, we did end up changing because number one, they weren't very proactive with figuring out what were the issues. And even when they knew the issues, they weren't very proactive with addressing them as well. So my take to you is just make sure that you go out there and speak to your customers constantly. Don't wait till it's too late. This is also a good opportunity for you to engage in soliciting referrals, testimonials, case studies, because obviously if they're having a good experience, then you can ask them, and it's not going to come across as being pushy. It's generally a good time, and most people will be happy to provide a testimonial referral if they're having a good experience. So one exercise you can start to do in terms of thinking about how you can exceed expectations is identify some key touch points, you know, probably about 3 touch points or so. Think about where you can exceed your customer's expectation. And this exercise that I really like is you want to basically go out there, have some fun, and map out what do you think a 5-star experience looks like. So 5-star is kind of the standard, right? But better yet, beyond a 5-star, what is a 6-star experience? What's a 7-star, 8-star, 9-star, 10-star? It's not to say that you will have to end up delivering that amazing 10-star experience to all your customers, but if you map it out that far, you can start to think about, you know, what's that sweet spot in between that is reasonable, but at the same time is also going to pleasantly delight our customers. So what are touch points? You know, they could be things like, you know, the sign up process, you know, when someone comes in and visits, let's say one of your shops, when someone views our website, maybe your sales interaction, your sales call, what have you. So those are touch points. This exercise actually comes from Airbnb. And one example that they were giving is, you know, a 5-star experience is you knock on a host's door, they open the door, they let you in. Great. The whole experience is seamless. You made the booking, you have a place to stay. Ta-da, right? 5-star experiences, great. Maybe not something worth telling a friend about. You know, you use Airbnb, it worked. But what would a 6-star experience look like? You know, 6-star experience, you have a host opening the door for you. You have someone greeting you. You know, someone saying, hey, welcome to my house. I'm your host. You show them around, you give them an orientation. Maybe there's a small welcoming gift. Maybe there's a bottle of wine, right? You know, you go to the bathroom, the water works. You open the fridge, there's water over there. Everything works well. That's a 6-star experience. And then you might say, oh, wow, I love this more than a hotel. I'm definitely going to use this again, right? It worked better than expected. Then what's a 7-star experience, right? The host greets you. You know, they say, hey, you know, I did some research on you before you came to visit. I know that you like to go snowboarding. Here's my snowboard for you to use. I've even booked lessons for you. This is going to be amazing. By the way, here's my car. You can use my car if you want to as well. And, you know, here's a list of good restaurants that you might like. Then that really exceeds, and you think, wow, this is above and beyond what I would really expect from any normal host. And the point of this process here is it may be unfeasible to do some of the crazy things, but if you go through this exercise of kind of mapping it out, you'll be comfortable with a certain point, and you'll find that, oh, you know what, maybe it's not as crazy as you might think to have certain, hosts, to educate your hosts to do certain things for their guests. Like, for example, give them a curated list of sites to visit, or have some items that your host can rent out to your guests, kind of thing, right? And it's not actually that crazy logistically, but it's going to be stuff that will create a great experience. So just wrapping it up here, above and beyond kind of the process, the key reminders are, I would say, number one, be authentic, be comfortable, use a style that's natural with you, but also at the same time, remember that there's no such thing as one authentic personality. I think what gets a bit some people uncomfortable in and around sales processes and doing sales is that they feel that they're putting on a different mask when they're at work. They're interacting with customers in a different way, and that's not them. My reminder to you here is that we all have different personalities in front of different people, right? You behave differently in front of your parents as opposed to your best friends. But that's okay. You can have different personalities in front of your parents and your best friends, but you are still you, right? It's okay to have a professional personality. It doesn't make you fake, but you just want to make sure that whatever personality you have, even if you're interacting with customers, that this still aligns with your personal ethos, ethics, values, and beliefs. You don't want to be doing certain things that you feel are not natural to you, that you don't agree with. Make sense? Again, at the end of the day, focus on the customer. It's all about them. If you are leaving them better than when you found them, then you would have done a good job. And don't just be nice, be kind. Don't just focus on being polite. You want to take it a step further and push them and challenge them if it's really in their best interest, right? Speak thoughtfully, make it comfortable for them. Don't just be uncouth and just speak and give direct feedback that they may become defensive for. So yeah, that's basically it. One final tip is no is sometimes a good answer. Not only receiving no's because it helps you disqualify leads and move on in the process instead of spinning your wheels and wasting your time. But sometimes when you ask certain questions that lead to a customer saying no, it may also make the customer feel a bit more comfortable in the process. Like I mentioned before, it's about speaking thoughtfully and making it comfortable for them, right? So generally, like, most people hesitate to say yes because saying yes to something means that they're committing to something, right? And saying no is their form of protecting themselves, protecting their time, protecting their resources, those kind of things. So how can you make the interaction more comfortable by asking them questions that don't make them feel like they're forcefully locking themselves into a commitment, right? So an example might be, saying things like, do you have a few minutes to talk, versus, is now a bad time to talk? If you say, do you have a few minutes to talk, most people will say no, because they're protective of their time, right? Versus if you say, is now a bad time to talk? And then they will say, no, actually, I don't mind. And they're more comfortable saying that no. So I don't want you to see this as a manipulative tactic, but it's more about thinking, how can you make the interaction more comfortable for your customer? Make sense? Other examples here, maybe, instead of saying, would it be a bad idea if, or you might say something like, have you given up on this project? So that way the customer doesn't feel like they're locking into something. They feel more comfortable explaining, right? If they have any hesitation, why they may not have replied to you, they'll be more comfortable instead of feeling like they're pressured to say a yes. Make sense? So yeah, I hope this has been valuable and helpful for you. Tune in to the next video where we'll go into copywriting a bit, because it's very closely related to this framework as well on the marketing side. And following up from that, there'll be another video in and around account management, which is more on the upselling stuff, the cross-selling stuff that I mentioned.